Welcome to Huber House here on the campus of the University of Vermont for today's debate, which will take place in the World Schools Debate Championship format. This debate will examine the motion, "This House supports strict gun control." The proposition team will consist of Sam Natale, first government speaker, Lucas Carras, second government speaker, Anya Juvancic as the third government speaker, and our reply speaker today will be Lucas Carras. The opposition team consists of high school students from Slovenia who are on their way to represent their country at the World Schools Debate Championship. The first speaker will be Jan Jeplan. Jurnej Jenko will be the second speaker. Filip Dobranic will be the third speaker. And our reply speaker will be Jan Jeplan. Now, let's proceed with this debate. Good luck to everyone, and let's happen.
The basic principle at hand here is fairly simple for anyone to understand. And the principle is this: if you have a society where people are killing each other, the best means to get them to stop doing so is to remove the ways in which they do so. A dog that has no teeth cannot bite. A snake without venom has no poison. So, before we get right to disagreeing with one another, I would like to, because I'm, a Vermont student, we like to hold hands and get along. I'd like to first clear up the things on which we agree, just for a moment. And the thing on which we agree, I believe, is that society should be safe from violence. We disagree on how to get there, but I'm going to show you how a society with strict gun control is the best way to prevent violence. And strict gun control is simply defined as that civilians cannot own guns. A discussion of hunting, which is tangential because even the most strict state for gun control, Japan, allows the use of hunting rifles, should be omitted because it's largely a secondary issue. The main issue at hand is the use of personal firearms, such as handguns. So let's get right into my first two arguments, which are that gun control helps to protect the populace, and it increases the efficacy of law enforcement. The third point, which my partner will address, is that gun control allows a government to protect citizens from decisions which may harm themselves, not just, as I will show, protect citizens from other citizens. So my first point is that gun control has the ability to protect the populace. Guns kill many, many people. They kill hundreds of thousands in my country each year, and I know that it's this way in countries all around the world. The reason that guns have this unique ability is several. What we're talking about is not a society in which people would kill people, because so long as people have existed, they've been killing each other. But guns introduced a specific, new, effective way that they would be able to kill people. Yes, sir?
How do you plan on removing the guns from, example, the black market?
Well, the guns on the black market, any kind of gun control has to be phased. For instance, when Japan introduced its very strict policy, it introduced phasing, and there's been programs in inner cities such as that buy back guns from the populace, where you can get more guns off the street once the policy is enacted. In addition, the stopping of production of guns now will protect the future. I'm not saying this is going to go into effect overnight, but I don't think it has to. I think just having the law in place and making it illegal to own them will decrease fatalities in a lot of ways. So let me get right on to why guns are so uniquely dangerous. Well, unlike a knife, guns have three things that really make them different. The first of these is that a gunshot is not often survivable. An assault with virtually any other weapon has maybe 4 or 5 times the likelihood of the victim surviving, rather than a gunshot, which not only causes direct damage to the organs, but because the large blast damages other systems, such as the circulatory system and the nerve system, and can cause long-standing damage because the projectile remains within the body of the person that's shot, more often than not. The second is that it causes collateral damage. You don't have you don't have children on a playground getting shot by stray knife stabbings. You don't have drive-by knifings on the street corner. But you do have hails of gunfire that kill tens of thousands each year. And the third is that guns make escape impossible. In a normal encounter, people don't start right up close to each other, they start at a significant distance. And in situations like this, if one person were to draw a knife, the victim, possible victim, has the ability to get away by running. But in the case of a gun, running only makes you more likely to be injured, not less. And therefore, it causes a response on the part of the victim that escalates the conflict more often than not. Yes, sir?
How about tasers and other weapons with a significant range?
Tasers have a less significant range than guns, especially in terms of the large-scale public killings. For instance, a taser can only shoot one person, while even a semi-automatic, even a revolver, can kill at least 5 or 6. Secondly, even if the range is no longer an issue, tasers and other weapons can be taken away with less injury to oneself. And it also increases the chances of somebody coming in. For instance, if somebody has a taser, they can only shoot one person in the room before they have to, recoil the projectile and try and shoot again. This allows other bystanders to come in and act. Meanwhile, if somebody has a gun, then they can shoot 4 or 5 people, and a bystander is less likely to endanger themselves by stepping in were they to have another weapon. Yes, sir?
But your argument stands on the premise that you will actually reduce the number of guns in the common population. Please prove that point.
Well, if you take a country that has very little gun control, like the United States, you see that depending on what state you're in, a very large segment of the population has guns, often for this concept that they're trying to defend themselves, or for other reasons, or simply because they want one. In a country like Japan, simply making it illegal has decreased the demand for guns, because most people don't want to commit an illegal act. And therefore, when you cut the demand for weapons, you cut the production, and it works in a very sort of economical way. Before I get distracted further, I'm going to talk about my second point, is that it increases the efficacy of law enforcement. Right now, we have a system in which the criminals and the law enforcement officers are separated only by the fact that police officers can be given credibility, and that they have no advantage in numbers, they have no advantage in tactics, they have no advantage in weapons, and this has made many parts of the country very unsafe, because the criminal element has just as much power as the law enforcement. So you see this especially in disaffected communities, especially in the inner cities, where a criminal population can hold as much sway over the population as a government can. And this is dangerous, because it again causes a cycle where people feel the need to arm themselves to protect themselves. But if we lived in a society where the police force was actually capable of stopping crime, then people wouldn't feel this need to defend themselves with a handgun. No, sir. In conclusion, the right of a person to be protected from violence is really what we're talking about. And how you arrive there. Because of the specific dangers that guns pose, and because of the specific advantage that a gunless world would pose in order to the keeping of law and order, this trumps any individual right to the possession, because the right of the group as a whole to be protected from violence, which we all agree is fundamental, should be upheld first and foremost. And the way to do that is through strict gun control. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. No?
I now call on the first speaker for the opposition, Jean Japlan.
When I was just a little boy, my grandmother once told me that guns don't kill people, and that people kill people. And that is exactly what side opposition today would like to argue. Our team line is simple. We say that everyone has the right to protection, you're out of order, sir, in a world where the state simply cannot provide that protection for us. And furthermore, moreover, what side proposition says is that gun control and stricter gun control will worsen the problem at hand. Now, we would like to argue that theme line in three major points of analysis. The first two I will discuss, and we'll talk about how the government has the responsibility to ensure the safety of its citizens. Secondly, I would like to talk about how crime isn't caused by guns. And then Jerne will talk about just how the proposal of side government today increases the crime rate. But before we do that, let's just move to a few points of rebuttal. Let's first discuss the model of side proposition, or lack thereof. Now, the first thing they say that strict gun control means that civilians cannot have guns. Well, we initially have 2 things to say about that. Firstly, how will they enforce such a proposal? How do they expect that such a proposal will be enforced in the society we have today? And secondly, how do they actually expect to remove the guns of the civilians that currently have them? Will they go house to house? Will they search every household for these guns and simply remove them? This was the things that were supposed to be explained from side proposition, but weren't. Then if we move on to their argumentation, where in the two arguments they basically say the same. If we have bigger gun control, our efficiency of law enforcement will increase, and thus we will be able to protect the populace. Well, initially we have 3 points to say about that. Firstly, they gave us no examples of where this was actually done and where this actually worked and how that actually improved the safety of its citizens. Well, for example, we have two great American examples, no thank you, of Washington, D.C., for example, where they have one of the strictest gun control laws in the entire U.S. state. Yet their crime rate is a lot bigger than any state where that gun control does not exist. Madam.
Did you realize that Washington just abolished its gun control laws?
Well, that does not change the fact that in the last year, where those gun control laws still existed, the crime rates were still getting higher and higher and higher. So if you want to make that point, you should elaborate on that further. Now, the first initial thing we have to say about their line of argumentations is that when they say that the police will have bigger advantages because there will be less guns, they have to understand that civilians currently don't cause crimes. They don't kill people. Criminals kill people which don't have registered guns, that get their guns on the black market. Their plan doesn't take into consideration the black market and thus not doing what they want to do. So basically, the entire proposal of side proposition does not solve the problem at hand. Now, to move on to side proposition and what we want to argue today. The first thing we want to argue is that the government has the prime responsibility to ensure safety. Now, speaking generally, yes, clap, clap. Now, speaking generally, we form social groups because we want better protection. We want to feel safe. We conduct social groups and are in social groups for better unity. And example of a social group is the state. Now, in a state, we give away some of our liberties, and so that the state can ensure that these liberties are being upheld. Now, putting this into the context of this debate, what they propose is that we give our liberty to hold these guns, our liberty by law to protect ourselves, to the state, so the state will be able to protect us. However, that apparently in today's world just simply isn't the case. Apparently, giving our liberty of our own protection does not work at the system at hand, where we keep having stricter gun control regulations, and we still see the crime rates increasing and increasing. What side opposition says today that I should have the right, and I have the right, according to the USA Second Amendment, to protect myself if I am endangered. How does a side proposition expect me, a very small person, a very skinny person, to protect myself when robbers get into my house, try to rob me, and by the time I call the police, I'm already raped, already my house is stolen? That is simply not the issue that we are willing to accept. That is not the reality side opposition today is willing to accept. We say that guns offer me protection, and I have the right, if the state cannot guarantee my protection, to protect myself, to be actually able to ensure my own safety. Now, And basically what that means for this debate is that when they say we will control, we will not allow civilians to have guns, we say that is a bad idea because it goes against the very fundamental principles, our very fundamental rights to take care of our own protection if the state is clearly not able to. Now, moving on to the second major argument in this debate is that crime isn't caused by guns. As said in my introduction, guns don't kill people, and basically people kill people. And generally speaking, if we want to analyze, no thank you sir, the crime rates in a society and why they're actually so big, we need to analyze the current social situation in a state and actually why criminal activity is so high. And what side the opposition would like to argue here is that it isn't because of guns. We have a good example here of how actually New York City, I think you all know that state, in 2004 wanted to reduce its crime rates by having stricter gun control. They had more policemen, the policemen had better equipment, and they increased and they had the proposal the side proposition wants to do today. Now, a very interesting fact is that that criminal activity didn't go down, that criminal activity overall didn't increase, and it didn't keep increasing. Now, the very interesting thing is that it decreased while actually they said that abortion is legal. Now, there's a very interesting parallel here because a lot of these criminals came from poorer parts of the town and were actually from mothers who were prostitutes. And actually, when we gave the ability for these mothers to actually not have these children, we saw that by changing the actual social elements of our society, that the actual gun control decreased. Yes, sir.
On that point, even if the crime rate stayed the same in our proposal, those crimes would not be conducted with guns, which means even if there were the same number of assaults, the number of deaths from those assaults would decrease.
Thank you, sir. It would be the same because criminal will still get guns on the black market. In order for you to say that, you have to explain how the black. You're out of order, Eva. Actually, another good example is the crack example. Now, crack was very popular in 1985. Then in 1948, 49, it started dropping, and criminal activity started dropping because of the reduced amount of crack in our society. So basically, what we say is that our social construct is such that if we want to change crime rates, if we want to reduce the crime rates, we need to actually solve the social problems first without actually limiting the freedoms of our civilians, without actually imperating our primary right to defend ourselves, our primary right for safety, our primary right to say, I can defend myself if the state simply doesn't have the ability to.
Daj meni, daj. Jaz sem jaz bolj navajena zgledala.
Nekaj je 5 sekund nisem imela.
Ja, vem.
Ali boljše sem postopal.
Samo verjetno veš, kaj sem navajena.
I thank the gentleman for his remarks, and now I call upon Lucas Caress to address the House on behalf of the proposition team.
Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to continue on this debate. I'm going to begin by making 2 points, which will then provide some enlightenment to my refutation of this fine gentleman's points. My point, I'll first expand on my partner's point, was that one, we can protect the populace at large from others, and that we can increase law enforcement capability. And my third new point will be not only can we protect people from others, but we can also protect people from themselves. Because let's be honest, a lot of these people who end their lives by pulling a trigger are victims too. Okay, moving on. First, my partner excellently examined the fact that when you decrease the ability of people to kill, that's a good thing. And what is the #1 weapon people use to kill? It is a gun. They got up here and they waxed poetic, you know, guns don't kill people, people kill people. Well, I'm glad that your grandmother was so kind to enlighten you on that subject, but I would also like to remind you, hey, glasses don't help people see clearly. People see clearly. You know what I'm saying? Or excuse me, glasses don't see clearly. Glasses don't have great vision, but they are products which people use to an end which is good. In similar case, people use this product to an end that is very, very negative. Because first, as my partner explained, not only are guns, firstly, they increase the ability of people to inflict harm upon you, not only from a distance, but also from not only from a close range, but also from a distance as he examined. It also decreases your ability to run from this danger. It eliminates the flight or fight reaction that you get when confronted with a weapon, for example, because if you try and run from a gun, you'll have a much better chance of being shot in the back. Also, as he explained, when we increase the gap of capability between the law enforcement officials and the criminals, what we can do is increase their ability to control the law criminals. And what they said in a point of information was that, but what about the black market? Well, we acknowledged, and as I was trying to ask in a point of information, there is a black market now, is there not? So what should we do? And where does that black market come from? It comes from the importation, it comes from the production of guns. And what we would like to do is decrease that production, decrease that importation, decrease that demand, and in the process, decrease the supply. Just because there is a black market, I love that argument, it'll create a black market. That doesn't make it okay, I understand that. But just because there's going to be a black market doesn't mean that we should try to do something effective for our community, for our country, for our state, for our social group, whatever you want to call it. It doesn't mean that something bad might happen. I am proud to say that saving lives far outweighs an already existent black market, which can actually be reduced in capability through the decrease in production and importation and demand, like I just stated. Now on to my new points. My new point is that we can not only save the lives of those who are being shot, but we can also save the lives of those who are doing the shooting. Now I know this may seem like a sort of ridiculous notion, but bear with me, folks. Human beings are imperfect creatures. We all know this. I'm sure to much of our regret, we know this, and actually that's a part that plays into it. Humans are products of some of their most base emotions, and 3 of those emotions are envy, rage, and regret. And all of these 3 basic human emotions come into play when discussing gun control, and here is why. The vast majority of murders are firearm murders, okay? And of those, a majority of murders are crimes of passion. Now what is a crime of passion? Well, let me illustrate for you. Someone comes home from a long, hard day of work, and they're expecting to come home to their main squeeze, per se. And what happens instead? They find their significant other in bed with another man, with another woman, whoever it may be. And what happens then? Oh, the rage begins, the envy begins. They find a gun. What do? Bam! Pull the trigger, over. It's over. And how fast did that happen? No, thank you. How fast did that happen? Maybe a couple of seconds. And as fast as it is for me to explain it to you, it's even faster for a person to pull the trigger and end a life. So you have the envy and you have the rage, which consume the person, and they are products of these emotions. But what do you get? What is that third emotion that I mentioned? It is regret. And that the majority of these crimes of passion are also crimes of regret. Because no sane person, and I think it actually has been proved that a large number of people, when encountering such a situation, they actually lose the ability to think rationally and sanely, and they actually become so overcome with rage and anger that they lose their mental faculty. Okay? And that when people become such victims, we have an obligation as a government, as was so eloquently stated over here, to protect people. We have an obligation to protect people even if it's when it's from themselves. So, how does this relate? Well, crimes of passion are only products of 2 things: our emotions and our ability to use those emotions to create a terrible end. So how can we reduce? Actually, yes, Philip, go ahead.
If people lose their minds, won't they search for the first thing they can use?
You're totally
and
right.
Will use it?
You're totally right, and they will. But I think, as my partner stated, other instruments or weapons they could use, including knives or blunt instruments, not only do they take much longer to use, it takes a lot longer to kill a person with a baseball bat than it does with a gun, but it also takes a lot longer to, there is a much higher mortality rate of those injured and having harm inflicted upon them with guns. If you don't think that being shot is a lot worse than being hit with a baseball bat or even stabbed, then I would implore you to make that point, but I don't think so. Now, moving on. Crimes of passion may be prevented. Okay? Because it's a lot easier to pull a trigger than it is to swing a bat, and it takes a lot less time too. So if our goal is to create a safer society, a society where we protect people from others and themselves, and we increase the ability of our law enforcement agencies to do their job, then these are 3 things that can come together to reduce not only violence but crime itself. And they made the point that But what happens when, like in Washington, D.C., when crime rates increase despite gun protection? Well, you know what? If there's a 100% increase in misdemeanor assaults, I'll take that over a 100% increase in crime of guns any day of the week. There is a degree of crime which you are missing, which is the fact that if the crime rate goes up 500%, but deaths by guns, and in fact deaths actually in general go down, I will take that trade-off every day of the week. I will take the trade-off of having less gun deaths for more assaults, for more stabbings, for more knifings. And it's kind of weird to sort of place it in these terms, but if you wouldn't like to take that trade-off, then please get up here and convince us, because I think that's going to be a hard task. So what have we shown you here today? We need to make our society more safe, and there's one way that we can do that: more strict gun control. Save yourself from being shot by another individual by removing that person's right to have a gun. Increase the ability of law enforcement to protect you from those individuals who may have any weapon by giving them, hopefully, the only capability to have guns, but also protect us from ourselves, ladies and gentlemen. I would love to stand up here and say, you know what? I never get angry, I never get jealous, I never get envious, but you know what? There are things that happen that are beyond my control, and I know that we are all capable of making mistakes. So let us reduce the ability and the occurrence with which we make mistakes, and also decrease the magnitude of those mistakes, because it's going to happen. People are going to kill people, there will be violence in society, but what kind of violence is that? Is that violence that's beyond our control, the violence that takes lives, the violence that forsakes both the shooter and the victim? Or we like to acknowledge a policy of harm reduction and reduce crime wherever we can. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman for his speech. I now call on Yernay Yanko to give the second speech for the opposition.
The government's plan doesn't really take away guns from the criminals, but what it does, it takes away guns from all the law-abiding citizens that have been able to protect themselves by using guns. And side opposition says that is bad, that is simply unacceptable, and it's going to have grave consequences. And we're going to deal, first of all, with what they came up, and then we're going to deal with their refutation of our arguments or lack thereof. But we're going to still reestablish them, and then we're going to deal with our constructive matter, talking about how the government's proposal actually does increase crime rates. It's simple as that. First of all, what did they bring to the table? Now, when we refuted their arguments, we had this key point, if we have the black market, then the criminals will still have guns. And what do they tell us? First of all, they say that production is going to go down because there will be less demand. Well, production, as long as there's going to be demand, there's going to be production. It's as simple as that. They've done it with drugs. They're still illegal, but they somehow managed to produce a lot of them. Furthermore, they say that demand is going to go down. Why? Well, the first speaker says because there's going to be less demand. Why? Because it is illegal. Well, what we say is simply the law-abiding citizens may not buy those guns, but the criminals will still will still want to buy those guns, and simply there will be demand. And they've managed to import drugs from all over Asia into the USA, into other countries, and we say they're going to do the same with guns. It's not that hard to mold a piece of metal that can shoot metal bullets, and we say that someone is going to do it, and we say that we're going to have untraceable guns that will cause even more damage. Then they talk about crimes of passion and how we need to protect ourselves from hurting ourselves. Now, they say that no matter what happens, people will still hurt themselves. And what does the government solve here? I say it doesn't solve anything. If you want to kill someone, you can still use a knife or a bat or a shovel. Apparently in Germany, they use lots of boots. I don't know how they do it, but they do it. It's possible. So, and in the UK, they have very, very strict gun protection laws. They use knives, and they still have a huge issue with crimes of passion. They still have a huge issue with suicides. So we do say that, in fact, the government doesn't solve anything at all at this point, and is, in fact, just using anti-rhetoric. Now, what did they tell us about our arguments? I'll take you in a second. They said nothing. Yes.
You use United Kingdom as an example, but are you aware that the crime rate and in fact the gun death rate is far, far less than it is in the Americas? Why would you use that point?
Yeah, well, you know, the gun death rate may be lower, but they use other weapons then, you know. It's about they have less guns and they use other things. It's as simple as that, and that's the point I'm trying to make. Simple as that. And what do they tell us about our arguments? First of all, we have the government responsibility. You know, if the government is unable to protect the citizens, then the citizens should be able to protect themselves as best as they can. They didn't answer that point at all. They didn't deal with it, not a single second. Then we talk about how it's not caused by guns. And we had this really, really illustrative example in New York. Banning guns, you know, having more policemen didn't help, but having less kids from unwanted pregnancies in poor districts did help. Why? Because they didn't have to live in such poor conditions where they would have to fight to survive. And we say the only way to solve this issue is to solve the underlying issue. Banning guns doesn't do anything at all, and they don't answer this point at all. Now, moving on, how the crime rate will increase. You know, first of all, we need to understand that whenever a robber goes into a robbery right now, he faces the possibility of dying. He faces the possibility of being shot and dying. And we say that's actually pretty good. Why? Because he's afraid. Robbers are just afraid of death as we are. And whenever he goes into a robbery, he faces that possibility. Yes, it may be small, but it is there, it is very real, and each time he does it again, well, it gets bigger. It's like playing Russian roulette. And we say that's a hugely important thing. And we say that that does in fact effectively deter robbers from going into actions. But more importantly, we also say that that makes robbers, you know, they go into empty houses, they steal cars at the curbs, they do something which isn't in a direct contact with people. And what we say is that basically, when we take away that deterrent, we say that robbers are going to be emboldened, they're going to go in situations where they're going to come into contact with people. Yes, please.
Then why isn't the robbing rate in the countries that already practice gun control so much higher than in countries like the United States that they do not have any gun control?
Well, you know, apparently you don't quote any statistics. And what I say is that, you know, neighborhoods which have a huge potential of being shot, for the inhabitants of that house, they're logically quite a bit safe. If you have any valid statistics, please do quote them in example, and we're going to see what we can do with that. But before you do that, we can't answer that effectively. First of all, you know, what we say is that as soon as people will no longer have that deterrent to not interact with people, to not go into houses where people are sleeping and potentially have their gun with them or some kind of other lethal weapon that shoots things, what we say is that basically those robbers are going to attempt much more dangerous heights. They're still going to have guns because they're going to buy them on the black market. And what we say is that basically we're putting our law-abiding citizens, which can protect themselves from the robbers with guns, in a very, very precarious and dangerous position. And we say that is simply unacceptable of the government to do, to put such a huge risk on an ordinary citizen which just tries to follow the laws. Furthermore, we say that the police will be helpless. Now we have schemes, when you buy a gun, you know, you need to register. The number of the gun is permanently registered to your name. And what we say is that the black market that is going to appear basically undercuts the ability of the police to track those guns, to see who bought them, to see what's being done with them, and to see how they ended up. And we say that this effectively undermines the ability of the police to solve crimes, to put the people who committed those crimes behind bars, and to have a long-term sustainable solution that does actually work and does undercut crime in our society. We say that this plan leaves the police powerless and leaves them without vital tools that they're currently using to solve crimes. So what do we see? Basically, the plan proposed by side government doesn't actually do much. They only take guns from the law-abiding citizens. They don't deal with the black market. They don't deal with the potential self-inflicted harm, and they don't deal with the underlying issues. So what do we see? The only way to have a sustainable solution in a society that we have now is to allow guns so that people can protect themselves and so that we have a society that is reasonably safe. Thank you.
Thank the gentleman for his remarks, and now I call on Anya Juvancic to address the House for the proposition team.
Most of the crimes committed with guns are crimes of passion. And most crimes of passion are done by ordinary people, just like you and me, faced with difficult situations. Faced with situations that have shocked them so profoundly that the only thing that they could think about in that particular moment is to do something drastic. And the best and the worst, and for them, the best thing to do at that particular moment is simply to take the gun and shoot. Why? Because guns are around, because these ordinary people, ordinary civilians, have them around for so-called protection, and simply because picking up a gun and shooting somebody from 20 paces is extremely impersonal. So the side of the opposition doesn't truly have the point here with protecting ordinary people, simply because this simple fact. Crimes with guns, crimes of passion, are done by the ordinary people, and are done only because the ordinary people have their guns on their disposal at any time, simply because of the advocacies posed by the governments as that are the same as our opposition. Let me go shortly through what was presented throughout this whole debate on the side, first on the side of the opposition, and then on the side of the government. On the side of the opposition, their first problem was that the government has to protect its civilians, and the only way our governments are capable of protecting the civilians are to hand them guns. So, in fact, we should have a program that would give a gun to every single civilian. Okay, here's a primary school child. Let's have a gun, you'll be more safe. Another primary school child, another gun. Do you want a pink one? Yes, you're a girl, it's lovely with sparkles. But this isn't such as it is. Let's look at the wonderful example of Japan that our first speaker brought up. Japan has one of the strictest laws about guns, and yet it also has one of the lowest crime rates of any countries in the world. And then we have to look at, for example, the state of New York. In New York, every 5 minutes a car is broken into. In New York, every 30 minutes a woman is being raped. So we clearly see the difference between the positive consequences of having harsher restrictions onto the guns than to simply be stating again and again we need protection. How can we need protection if the only people we need to protect ourselves is from ourselves? The next argument they have been trying to persuade us with, that they try to analyze the social structure. They try to analyze that in the slums the crime rates are higher. And yes, we agree with it. We agree with the social problematics of the slums. We agree with the social problematics of the lower classes. The only thing we do not agree on the side of the government is that we should solve this problematics, these social problematics, with handing over guns, with teaching the children into those neighborhoods that the only way to protect yourself is not to go to a police officer, is not to go to school, is not to obey the society, the laws. The only way you can protect yourself, the only way you can be strong, you can be powerful, is to pick up a gun. This is exactly the precedence that the side of the opposition is trying to pursue us just a second, John, and we believe on the side of the government that this precedence is wrong. Yes, John?
Just complete misrepresentation. What we're saying is that if we feel that the state cannot provide the protection we need, we have the constitutional right to provide that protection ourselves.
So we only have that they only have this constitutional right in the United States of America. In, for example, Slovenia, in Japan, in Germany, in Australia, they do not have this constitutional right, and they have lower crime rates, and they have more trust into their country, and they are much more satisfied, much more happy, much more safe without the guns. So none of your examples do count. because we have given you numerous examples of countries that have gun protection, that have restrictive laws on gun, and have lower crime rates, and people do not feel the need to pick up a gun to protect themselves. So as I was saying, in concern to your argument, we agree that we should protect the people into the slums, we agree that we should educate them, but we definitely do not agree that we should hand over a gun to them. And this is exactly what your argument was speaking about with the abortion, because this is, free abortion is a social help, social state, and is a help to the people. It is not handing over a gun. And as for your third argument, it was simply stating that it would decrease the crime rate, but I believe that throughout my rebuttal I have already answered that point. Now let's take over to the side of the government. What has been presented to you from this side? In our first argument, we have been clearly speaking to you about how owning a gun reduces your ability to survive interaction between and somebody that's been trying to be violent to you. We have proven you that with a gun, because it is so impersonal and because it reaches so far, you have less survivability. So even though we have an assault with a knife, you have much more possibility for you to run away, you have much more possibility for you to fight your assessor, you have much more possibility to actually survive this. But with a gun, because it is so easy to shoot, it is so hard to run away, we are in fact endangering again the lives of our citizens. Yes, Inko.
So you're saying homeowners which now don't have any guns should just simply run away from robbers with guns?
Yeah, I believe that homeowners should have the trust into their police, should call the police, and the police can come with their, even though they might have guns, and get the robber, because this is how a functioning state works. To continue on with the side of the argumentation of the government. The next point we have so eloquently pointed out is that with less guns onto the streets, the police will be in fact more effective, just because we have a simple meaning of supply and demand. If we would take the guns away from the civil populace, as was done efficiently in Northern Ireland, for example, in the IRA, the police would have much less guns to deal with. Yes, we agree we'd have a small black market, but this black market would be much smaller, and the efficiencies of the police with dealing with criminals are the same, because as you have so eloquently stated, the robbers, the true criminals, not the civil populace that commits the most crimes, already use unregistered guns, so police already has to deal with all those problems, so we clearly cannot see your argument about the social market. And as for a third argument that was pointed out from the side of the government, is the fact that we should protect the people against themselves. Why? Because we are just humans. And if we have a shocking situation on our hands, if we have somebody we love, if we find somebody we love into the embrace of another, what will we do? Will we reach towards the gun? Is it just there on the counter? Or will we do something reasonable? Will we go somewhere to seek help? Will we talk to them? What will our society teach us? What do we do in times of crisis, in times of shock, in times when we are in danger? Do we seek refuge into our country, into our law enforcement, or we simply take the problem into our own hands and pick up a gun, no matter how drastic that might be? Thank you.
I thank Lady for her remarks, and now I call on Filip Dobranic to speak third for the opposition team.
Madam Speaker, since the government decided to actually answer our arguments, we are firstly going to deal with those. Then we're going to take a look at what the government presented to the table, and finally wrap it up with the points of the opposition. Now, what the Speaker happened to be doing for 4.5 minutes was dealing with a straw person argument she created out of our first 2 points. But that's fortunate, dear judge, because that means you get to vote for the opposition. Because what the third government speaker said about our first argument is that it talks about let's give guns to people. Now one, this is a reduction to the absurd, which is a logical fallacy we're not going to follow, and this was a straw person argument she created because she was unable to defeat our own argument. We never said we were going to give out guns to people, and if the government would have taken the time and patience to hear us out, to actually hear what we were saying that the citizens deserve their safety, and when the state fails to provide that safety, we believe that the citizens have every right and should be granted every possible opportunity to protect themselves. No, thank you. Now, here she managed to talk about Japan, when we are not even going to compare the poverty levels in Japan and in the United States of America, and we cannot even talk about the cultural differences and the whole culture surrounding firearms in Japan and in the United States of America. We're not going to talk about the different values of respect in Japan and in the United States of America. All of these things that they agree at a certain point in this debate that do take care of how hard our crime rate is. Now, what did she say about our second argument? She said that we are again saying that they do not want to solve this by handing out guns. Again, we see the straw person argument she's continuously attacking. At this point, I call the government team to start attacking what we're actually saying and not creating little straw men and women out of our arguments and smashing those. Now, let's get on with what we've heard about, what we've heard in this debate from team government. Firstly, they talk about how gun control supposedly saves lives. And they say guns are special here. Now, firstly, what we would like to say about this argument, we want to talk about the United Kingdom, which still has a rising murder rate, although it has a very strict gun control. Its current police officers are extremely concerned with the numbers of knives and cold weapons that are circulating the streets, since more and more people are getting killed by knives and guns. Now, the next thing, what they said about this example is that the United Kingdom still has a lower murder rate, which we might agree into, but we still say that gangs are not so popular in the United Kingdom. We do not have the gang culture present. We do not have gang fights, which are actually the type of gunfights which kill most people and not crimes of passion, and the third government speaker wanted to make you to believe, and that is why the difference in the murder rate occurs in the UK and the United States of America. No, thank you. Now let's talk about black market. We've given you the drugs analogy. They failed to tackle it. The third government speaker herself, at the end of her speech, stated that criminals buy their guns already on the black market. Now, if the government itself states that, how are they solving anything? If they're taking the guns out of the hands of the people that do not kill other people. Because as soon as the government says that the criminals get their guns from a place upon which they have no control of, they're not solving the problem, and we're not supporting the government proposal. Now, they say it's easier to survive when a person threatens you with a knife instead of a gun. Now, what does this principle say to you? They say, the government, we do not care about the crime rate. We don't care about the amount of people that try to commit a murder. We do not care about the amount of people that try to rob or kill another person. All we do care is about the tools they have in their hands. What Team Opposition is constantly saying is that we have to find sources of criminal in our society and solve those. We want to reduce the number of people that actually think about killing someone else. Now, their second argument, giving power to the police force. Yes, if police has bigger guns than criminals, that gives them more power. Yet this argument doesn't prove us anything. And still we get to the point of where the criminals get their guns, which we have already dealt with.
Sir.
Yes?
They get their guns from legal manufacturers and from legal dealers.
Actually, no. We elaborated on this point already. So, their third argument, they talk about crimes of passion. Now, the first thing we want to talk about this here, if a person comes home and sees his wife and another guy in the bed, he needs the same amount of time to go and grab a gun to shoot that person as he needs to go and grabs a big knife in the kitchen and stabs him, which shouldn't be much of a problem when he's embraced in the hug of his other loved one. So we see that they're not solving the problem. The second thing we want to talk about is that this argument actually states that people will keep on shooting and killing each other. Because at one point in this argument, they say people will always commit crimes of passion. And they themselves admit that gun control doesn't solve crimes of passion and doesn't reduce the crime rate in that area. Now then, what the third government speaker wants you to buy into it, that most gun crimes are committed out of passion, or crimes of passion. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't think we've had a more false claim in today's debate than this one is. Firstly, it's not true. The second thing, we've already talked about. This argument itself talks about how the crime rate will remain as high as it is today. No, thank you. And the third thing, the police has no power in this instance. When a person walks into his own house, sees his significant other with another person, the police doesn't have the time, neither the notification, to react fast enough, even if the person was to attack that other guy with a baseball bat. They are not solving the problem. Now, what has team opposition talked about? We've talked to you about the principle that the government team tries to be proposing. We want safety. Yes, it might sound a bit harsh, but we believe that we established government, states, countries in order to keep our lives protected. And when the government, the state, fails to meet that protection standards, we believe that the people should be granted the power to protect themselves. This was never answered adequately. The second thing, crime isn't caused by guns. We were talking about the abortion that stopped the crime rate. We were talking about the lessening of crack abuse, which also dropped the crime rate in the state of New York City. This argument, again, was not answered adequately. And our third argument, deterrent, what did we hear about it? Well, I've already answered it with the same point that didn't answer the first and the second argument of the opposition. Again, we believe that this is not an answer to the point that people will be making harsher crimes, that people will lose, that criminals will lose the deterrent, and that the police will be helpless, because even the small amount of murders that right now happen with registered guns and are solved will not be solved in the future. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman, and I now call upon Jean Japlan to conclude the debate for the opposition side.
In a perfect world, the motion at hand would not be debatable. In a perfect world where the state would have the ability to protect every one of us, to protect each individual, this would not be an issue. We would not need guns for our protection. But the matter of the fact is that we do not live in a perfect world. We live in a perfect world where people exist solely with the thought process of robbing others, of killing others, of raping others. And that is the reality we need to debate here. That is the reality that we need to discuss. So when taking a step back and looking at the bigger picture of this debate, we see that we need to answer three fundamental questions to actually see who argued their case better. The first question is, will our world be safer with the proposal of side proposition? The second question is, will crimes of passion decrease with the proposal of side proposition? And thirdly, do we, the citizens, the people, have the right to protect ourselves? So the first one, with the proposal of side proposition, will we be safer? Now, first thing, they never actually answered the rebuttal that we posed in our first speech about their proposal. How will they enforce this, and how will they remove the guns that are already in the society? That was the question that was raised in our first speech and yet was never answered by side proposition. Moreover, side opposition argued that guns aren't the real issue here, and in order to actually decrease the crime rates, we need to deal with the social and economical issues of our society, of poverty, of actually children having to live in an environment where they have to fight to survive. We argued that by giving into the proposal of side proposition, The only thing we're doing is we're disarming the victims and not disarming the criminals. We're disarming the people that need protection, while the criminals will still be able to get their weapons on the black market and still do the things they want to do. So will we be safer? No, we will not be, because we are disarming ourselves. We are not doing the right thing. Secondly, will crimes of passion decrease? Now this was actually a valid point if you ask me from side proposition. Crimes of passion are a big deal. When human beings are angry, are passionate, we'll do all sorts of things, all sorts of bad things. However, they never fully answered why gun control would solve that. If I'm angry, if I'm mad, I might as well be taking a gun or a knife and doing the crime of passion I want to do. Gun control, stricter gun control, is not solving that problem. And while we do agree that crimes of passion are something that is a problem, we also say that stricter gun control does not solve it and thus not fulfilling their role. Thirdly, do we have the right to protect ourselves? If we go beyond the fact that this is not a constitutional right in every country, do I have a right to actually protect myself when the state is not able to? We say that we should have the tools to actually save ourselves when no one else is able to. We should be allowed to do what we must to survive if no one else is there to do it for us. So, at the end of the day, what we have is side proposition that lives and wants a perfect world, that believes we live in a perfect world, and but what they're actually doing is taking the only way we have to protect ourselves from the villains, from the criminals that clearly exist away. And we have the side opposition that is aware of the socio-political causes of high crime rates and wants to make a difference and wants to do the right thing and actually solve the problem with the right measures and the right tools. Thank you.
I now call on Sam Natale to conclude the debate for the proposition team.
All right, aside from the rhetoric about the rights that just sort of was dropped in and popped out to say hi in the last speech, the main issue here is really focused on two kinds of crime. I'm going to handle each of these individually and show you why our side prevents both of them. The first of these, the one that they really liked, is the criminals, the bad men with masks and guns. Well, first of all, the op makes two contradictory points that really negate this part of the debate. The first is that they said gun control, that gun ownership prevents violence, that it's a deterrent. They also say that gun ownership has nothing to do with violence, it's abortion. And so if we take the logic of their second point, it negates all of their rhetoric about how gun ownership can change this. They say that it doesn't have to do with guns at all, it really has to do with abortion. And on this, we agree, the fundamentals of violence and the amount that it's carried out is unchangeable, but the degree to which that violence is carried out can be controlled through gun control. So let's go, especially if we accept, as my partner said, that in a normal society, in a healthy society, people rely on police officers to stop their crime. They don't just take it up for themselves. And what this really comes down to is, do we really want to have a society that completely lacks faith in a form of government and the abilities of the government to protect them? And I believe that in a sane, healthy, modern environment, we should rely on the government. So let's go to the second kind of crime, the kind of crime that is more prevalent and more relevant to this debate, and we'll show how this is where the debate really happened, and this is crimes of passion. First of all, our analysis of what makes guns uniquely dangerous and what helps guns in a unique way elevate and escalate situations that would have otherwise been nonviolent or less violent has stood. They haven't really taken this. They haven't really showed us how knives you can't escape from, or they never really touched this. So we can say that it is more likely to have more crimes of passion escalate further in a society with guns than one without. Secondly, not only does gun control reduce the number and escalation of crimes of passion, but it also affects the severity and the amount of damage that is done. And this is something that they also didn't really touch. And they say that, oh, there's still a murder rate But the fact is that if you have an assault with a knife, that person is much more likely to survive than if you have an assault with a gun. And that's just something that is stood up throughout the entire round. The third thing is that the first kind of crime is what they've worried about. Someone breaking into your house and stealing your house and hurting you. This isn't the issue at hand, because statistically, as we've all said down this bench, you're much more likely to be killed by someone you know than someone you don't. And their response was, nuh-uh, no. They didn't really go into how this isn't true, but really. And this is why gun control works, is that all of these law-abiding citizens were law-abiding until the day that they walked in on their significant other. They were law-abiding until the day that they made a mistake that changed their lives forever. In a society where you take away the ability for them to damage themselves and damage others, even if they are law-abiding at the time, you create a healthier, better world. And so, if you accept that the plan is effective, and they conceded that it is effective because, as the third speaker said, the big problem in the UK where they have strict gun control isn't guns, it's knives. So apparently there is some way for a government to come in and make this work if there's no more gun violence in the United Kingdom. So the plan has been proven to be effective. It's been proven that violent crime, men with guns, really shouldn't have a place in this, and that it has been proven that this can reduce the more pernicious crime, which is crimes of passion. Thank you.